So you finally made the decision to become a pilot. Man, that's fantastic. But I want to warn you, flight training comes with a lot of surprises. Before I started my own flight training, I spent hours or even days researching all the flight schools in my area. Even then, there were so many things that still caught me off guard while I was in the process of flight training. From hidden costs to emotional ups and downs, flight training is a journey that's going to change you and challenge you in ways that you would never expect. In this video, I'm going to share 5 things that I wish that I knew before I started flight training. These insights would have saved me some major headache, and they also would have helped me progress faster and more confidently. And may I say, fewer financial surprises along the way. Whether you're just daydreaming about being a pilot, or you've already started flight training, or maybe you even just have a discovery flight schedule, these tips are going to help you set realistic expectations and navigate the extremely complicated world of flight training. So I encourage you to buckle up, grab a notepad and a pen to take some notes, because trust me, by the time we're done with this video, you're going to be one step closer to making your flight training experience smoother, smarter, and overall just more enjoyable. Number 1, everyone talks about how expensive flight training is. If you go to a flight school, you could ask them for a rough estimate of how much their training is going to cost. Some of these are really good, some of them are pretty poor. They might just give you the numbers for the airplane and the instructor, and that's it. And yes, that's going to be a vast majority of your costs, but that's not going to include so many things like a ground school or getting an iPad or a quality headset. Flight training involves these unexpected expenses every step of the way. Everything from getting your medical, getting that iPad, getting that headset, even taking check rides and written tests costs a substantial amount of money. You might find a flight school around you that's at a larger airport. You might think, wow, this is great. You get to train at a bigger airport, but often that's going to have the drawback of spending a lot more time on the ground or getting clear of their airspace before you can even start the flight training that you want. Whereas a smaller mom and pop flight school at a smaller airport, you should be able to take off and fly right away. All of these little costs add up tremendously over the course of your training. Don't let this scare you away though. The reason I'm telling you this isn't to scare you out of flight training. It's to just help you become more prepared. If you know about these hidden costs up front, then you can budget for them. Then you can plan for them. For instance, if you invest in a high quality, nice headset early on, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. But at the same time, it saves you from having to rent a headset from the school. Now, it might only be $10, $15 per flight lesson for that crappy, tingy, horrible headset that they have. But over the course of your flight training, that's going to add up to where often if you just buy a decent headset at the beginning of your training, it's going to cost less than if you were to rent a headset through the entire course of your training. Another tip when it comes to this is create a written out budget and a written out plan. Make sure that you do your best to make sure that all expenses are accounted for. Having that written out will allow you to set a realistic budget and allow you to take that stress off of yourself. If money is tight, there's tons of programs out there that offer scholarships for aviation. Organizations like AOPA, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, even more niche groups like Women in Aviation. Ultimately, you need to think of flight training as an investment for your future, especially if you're doing this as a career. Recognize that there's a lot more to it than just the hourly fee of the plane and the instructor. This is going to help you prepare financially and reduce that stress later on down the line. Stay focused on what really matters, flying safely and efficiently. If I would have known about all these small upfront costs, I would have organized my budget early on way different than I did. And I also would have saved myself a lot of anxiety in the process. Thing number 2 that I wish I would have known beforehand is the importance of a good ground school and having good study habits. You might think that flying is all about hopping in the plane and logging those hours. And yes, that's a huge part of it. But ultimately, you are going to spend significantly more time on the ground studying than you are going to in the actual airplane. The truth is, there's a huge academic side to becoming a pilot. You're going to learn everything from aerodynamics to airplane systems to weight and balance to navigation to regulations. There's so much to it. If you're not prepared for the amount of reading and memorization and understanding of these items, later on down in your training, it's going to come back and bite you hard. It's going to feel very overwhelming very fast. The good news here is that effective study habits can make this extremely manageable. Instead of just cramming everything in last minute before your written test or before your check ride, set aside regular time slots every single day to work on a little bit. Use digital tools like Quizlet or practice tests online, or have paper flashcards. Do things outside of just the regular scope of the ground school that you are working on. Taking all these things in through different forms of media is going to strengthen that connection in your mind. And remember, ground school isn't just about passing the written test at the end of it or passing a check ride. It's about learning the foundations and the basis for everything that is to come. It's going to make you feel a lot more comfortable in the airplane because you know what's going on and you understand the principles behind it. Trust me, the more prepared you are, the more confident and comfortable you're going to be when these unexpected situations arise. Another piece of advice I have for you, if you are doing an online ground school or some sort of structured ground school, it's probably going to follow a very similar hierarchy to the way that your instructor is going to teach you in the aircraft. Piece of advice to you is try to line that up very closely to what you're actually learning in the plane. The learning becomes so much stronger when you learn about it beforehand and then you go and reinforce those ideas in the plane. It's so much better than having to try to learn in the airplane. I always tell my students that the airplane is the worst classroom. So try to line your ground school up with what you're learning in the airplane. Looking back, I was a horrible flight student during my private stages. I didn't have any sort of study tips. All I did was right before the check ride, right before the written test, I would cram it. And man, that came back to bite me later on in my training. If I would have had effective study tips, I would have been so much further ahead. Next on my list is something that caught me totally off guard, and that's just the overall time commitment of how long this process takes. We often hear, well, the FAA says that you only need 40 hours to get your private pilot's license, when realistically, the national average, I believe, is somewhere in the 70s. You could easily take 50, 60, 70 hours, maybe more, maybe less, but that's a pretty substantial amount of time, and that's only the time spent in the airplane. Weather delays, instructor availability, maintenance are all going to be trying their absolute hardest to make this process take even longer. It can make this process stretch for months or even years for some people in some cases. I remember back in my training, there were so many times where I just had to take gaps, either because of weather or maintenance, or my instructor went to the airlines. And when I would return from these gaps, it would be like I had never flown an airplane. Almost every single one of those flights back after a long break, it was relearning everything. And a flight lesson can cost $300, $400, $500. My tip to you is try to have a consistent schedule. Maybe block out specific times each and every week to go fly. Or if a plane goes down for maintenance, or if weather cancels a flight, try your hardest to schedule makeup sessions for that. That way you're not having those long extended breaks like I had. Another factor to this is the plateau effect. You're going to have breakthroughs while you're flying, and that's often going to be followed by times where you feel like you're not improving at all. In fact, plateaus are a super common part of learning any complex skill. The key to this is just perseverance and then having a willingness to adapt your situation and change something up. Maybe that's fly with a different instructor, fly at a different time of the day, fly a different day of the week. All of these little factors, often it just takes a little bit to help you break through that plateau. Sometimes you might just need to take a step back and reflect. Take a day off, take 2 days off, think about what's going on, try to understand why you're in this plateau and what you can do to get yourself out of it. Often it doesn't take much. The bottom line for this is just recognize that flight training is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Progress is going to be uneven, but with perseverance and smart planning, you're going to make progress in the long run. One of the most important tips that I have for you is finding the right flight school. Choosing the right flight school can make or break your flight training experience. Looking back, I wish that I had done substantial more research when I was choosing my flight school. Ultimately, I ended up getting lucky and finding one that worked for me on my first try. After hearing so many stories from people in the comments or other flight instructors, it is super easy to fall victim to a bad flight school. So you walk into a flight school or you're researching flight schools, what are these things that you should be looking for? Number one is the overall instructor quality. A vast majority of instructors on the market today are time building to move up to the airlines. And that doesn't automatically mean that they're a bad instructor. All of the instructors I work with, instructing is not their end goal, but while they're doing it, they give it their all and they have a passion for it. There are definitely some flight schools and some instructors where their entire goal for the flight school is to make money and their entire goal as the instructors is to move on to the airlines. I want you to interrogate these flight instructors in these flight schools. If they're not even willing to sit down and have a conversation with you and answer every single question that you may have before spending $11,000 to $15,000 to get your private pilot's license, take that as a huge red flag. Interrogate these guys. Go in with a prepared list of questions to ask. Questions about aircraft availability, maintenance delays, instructors. Ask your instructor how long they're going to be here before they move on to the airlines. Ask them about their check ride pass rate. Ask the school about their check ride pass rate. Interrogate them. Make them answer these questions. And if they're not willing to, go out that door. Find a different place. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but location is a huge factor into this. If you're flying at a super busy, complex airport, that's great. You're going to get that higher level of training from that. But oftentimes you're going to spend more time on the ground, and you're going to spend more time getting out of their airspace before you can even start practicing the maneuvers that you want to be practicing that lesson. As a local mom and pop flight school at a smaller airport, you can take off and you can go practice your maneuvers immediately. It cuts down on a huge amount of time and money, but you're often missing out on that higher level of experience in the end. So ultimately, it all depends on what your goals are and what your personal preference is. Lastly, take into account their customer service. Were people smiling at you when you walked in through the door, or did everyone look mopey? Is there a willingness to help you out when you walk in and answer your questions, or do all the flight instructors scatter and run away? My last thing that I wish that I had known before flight school is that flight training is an emotional roller coaster. Learning to fly is one of the most rewarding things that someone can do, but it's not without moments of self-doubt or fear or even frustrations. On one flight, you might nail your landing and feel on top of the world. And on the next one, you have a little bit of a crosswind and you just slam that son of a gun into the runway. It'll feel like you've forgotten everything that you've learned up to this point. The highs and lows that you experience in flight training are part of the journey. It's important to acknowledge that you are going to be constantly pushing yourself out of your own comfort zone. That can be super scary, even for people that have dreamed of flying their whole life. The key to remember is that every flight lesson is just that. It's a lesson. Even the ones where you perform poorly still help you learn more and progress onto that next step. The mistakes can often be even more valuable than the successes. Another factor is going to be how you handle external pressures like money concerns or the stress of an upcoming check ride or the nerves that get associated with a lot of these flights. It can all add up very quickly. You need to find a healthy way to let out that stress. Don't just keep it into yourself. A big tip that I have for you is try to find a community of other people that are going through the same steps. Make some friends with the FBO and start a group chat. Hang out with them outside of flying. Find local flying clubs, or maybe your school even has a club. Having a support system that is there and understands the challenges that you are going through is going to pay dividends in the future. They're going to be there to comfort you at your lowest lows, and they're absolutely going to celebrate you when things are going well. If things are going poorly and you feel like you're getting a little overwhelmed, don't be afraid to take a day off or 2 days off. Reset your mindset and get back in the plane with a fresh head. Ultimately, going into it, recognizing that flight training is an emotional roller coaster is going to save you from having to learn that as you go, like I did and a lot of other people do as well. This is going to make you a much, much stronger and more resilient pilot. So here we have it. That was 5 things that I wish that I knew before flight training. From budgeting to managing your realistic expectations of what to expect from flight training. These insights are going to help you prepare for what there is to lie ahead. This is a super exciting time in your aviation journey. I'm so glad that you decided to become a pilot. If this is some of the content that you like to watch, subscribe. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you have anything that you feel like I missed out on within these tips, let me know down below, and I'll see you guys next week.